All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about something that pretty much runs our lives, whether we notice it or not: the economy. We're going to break down this incredible balancing act between jobs, the prices we pay, and whether everything is growing or shrinking. So let's just jump right in. Why is it so hard to get the economy just right? Well, you can think of it like this massive, high-stakes balancing act. And it's one that has a direct impact on your job, your wallet, and your future. The real trick is, how do you keep it all from crashing down? Okay, so first up, let's look at one side of this giant scale: jobs. I mean, keeping people employed, that's probably one of the biggest goals for any economy, right? Now, the definition here seems pretty straightforward. You're looking for a job, you can't find one. Simple. But, and this is a big but, unemployment isn't just one thing. It actually shows up in a few different ways, and each one has its own cause and its own fix. And this is where it gets really interesting. Each of these types, they need a totally different fix. Frictional, when you're just between jobs, that's totally normal, maybe even a good sign. But then you get to structural unemployment, that's the big one. Imagine your job being replaced by AI. That's a huge problem. That means we need a whole new approach to skills and training. And believe me, this pressure is very, very real. Just to give you a sense of the scale, look at this number: 1.77 million. That's how many people applied for just over 17,000 police jobs in one state in India. It's just a huge reminder that behind all this economic theory, you've got real people in this intense competition for a stable paycheck. Okay, so let's shift gears and look at the other side of this balancing act. Because when you try to fix unemployment, sometimes you create a whole new problem. And that problem is inflation. Inflation is one of those words we hear all the time. But what is it, really? Super simple, it's when your money just doesn't buy as much as it did yesterday. It's like your shopping cart is getting smaller, even though you're spending the exact same amount of cash. And over time, it just eats away at your savings, your whole standard of living. So, where does this inflation come from? Well, it's usually one of two things. First, you've got demand pull. That's when everybody's out there wanting to buy stuff, and there just isn't enough to go around. Then there's cost push. That's when it gets more expensive to make things. Think about a sudden spike in oil prices. Those extra costs, yeah, they get passed right on down to you at the checkout. But sometimes things get really, really messy. You get something called stagflation. And honestly, it's the absolute nightmare scenario for anyone trying to manage an economy. You get the worst of both worlds. The economy is tanking, people are losing their jobs, but prices are still going up. It just breaks all the traditional rules. And that brings us right to the heart of the matter, the ultimate economic dilemma. For years and years, the thinking was that you had this fundamental trade-off. You could have lots of jobs, or you could have stable prices, but you couldn't have both. So here's the big question, right? The one every government and central bank is wrestling with. Can you actually have low unemployment and low inflation at the same time? For a long, long time, the answer seemed to be a pretty firm nope. You had to choose your poison. This whole idea was mapped out in something called the Phillips curve, and it was pretty revolutionary at the time. It basically gave policymakers a kind of menu. They could say, okay, we'll accept a little more inflation to get unemployment down, or we need to cool inflation even if it means more people are out of work. But, of course, the real world is always way messier than a neat graph. The Phillips curve was the go-to guide for policy in the 60s, but then the 1970s happened. That stagflation we talked about, it completely blew the curve apart. It proved you could have high unemployment and high inflation. Now, today, that relationship seems a lot weaker, almost flat, and that's forced economists to basically go back to the drawing board. So all that chaos led to a brand new idea, this concept of a natural rate of unemployment. The theory is that every economy has this baseline level of joblessness, and if you try to use policy to force unemployment below that natural level, you don't actually get real sustainable growth. All you do is spark a ton of inflation. And you know what? This idea totally changed the game for how central banks run things. Okay, so what happens when this whole balancing act just fails? When everything tips over? Well, that's when we enter a word that nobody wants to hear: recession. And a recession is way more than just a scary headline or a couple of bad months for the economy. A real recession is a deep, widespread downturn that hits pretty much everything and everyone: jobs, incomes, company sales, you name it. And what's so dangerous about a recession is that it can feed on itself. It creates this vicious cycle. People get nervous, so they stop spending. Businesses see sales drop, so they lay people off. And now those people have even less money to spend. And the cycle just keeps going down. Now, because recessions are so destructive, economists are always on the lookout for warning signs. Think of them as storm clouds on the horizon. They're watching things like GDP growth, unemployment rates, of course, but also some more technical stuff, like an inverted yield curve in the financial markets, which can be a surprisingly accurate predictor of trouble ahead. Okay, so that's a lot of theory. Let's bring it back down to earth and look at how this plays out in the real world. We're going to take a quick snapshot of the Economic Balancing Act in India. Now, this is fascinating. At first glance, you look at this data and it seems like India has found the magic formula. I mean, GDP growth is a whopping 7.8%, and inflation is super low, a 6-year low, in fact. But then you dig a little deeper. The overall unemployment rate looks great, just 3.2%. But look at the unemployment rate for young people. It's over 10%. And that right there is a perfect example of how this balancing act is never, ever really over. There's always another challenge. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that there's no single magic button you can press to fix the economy. It's just a constant, never-ending process of making trade-offs and adjustments. You're always trying to juggle keeping people in jobs, keeping prices stable, and keeping the whole thing growing. And that really leaves us with the big question, not just for economists, but for all of us. As these massive forces like AI and shaky global supply chains keep changing the rules of the game, is this balancing act going to get any easier, or is it about to get a whole lot harder? That's definitely something to think about.